They don't have a weakness. That's what Jeremy Pruitt said about the Georgia Bulldogs, the number 3 Georgia Bulldogs, and his team is going to Athens to try to knock off a team that has no weakness, according to Jeremy. And here's a couple more things that Jeremy had to say. I think it's one of the better teams I've seen in college football over the last couple of years. I think these guys have a lot of speed. They're big, they're physical at the line of scrimmage and out on the perimeter. They've got good running backs, good skill players, and they get the guys the ball. They give you multiple looks on the defensive side. They create a lot of negative plays and special teams because of their athleticism. They've got good returners. They've got good speed. They're physical on their coverage team. So I think that's pretty much true. I'm not sure we're really ready yet to say that it's one of the better teams I've seen in college football over the last couple of years. I don't know what couple of years is. LSU was pretty good last year. I'm not sure this Georgia team's on that level. But, Jeremy knows talent. I'm not sure he's quite the recruiter that Kirby Smart is. He's not proven that he's the program builder or coach that Kirby Smart is either. But, he's no dummy. He might not know what asparagus is, but he knows a thing or two about recruiting, or he did for a long time. And you see what Tennessee's done here lately. They've strung together 8 wins in a row. 2 of them over South Carolina, 2 of them over Missouri. Those are not strong programs, but still, he's gotten them out of the situation they were in for such a long time, or at least it seems that way. And now the question is, can the Vols jump up to where Georgia's at? And that's what I'll try to answer right now. Dean Legge from Dog Post, Making You a Smarter Georgia Fan. Jeremy was in Athens for 2 years, 2 chaotic years for sure, particularly the 2015 season. I've written about that quite a bit. The 2015 season was a total disaster. And since moving on from that time, he's been at Alabama. Now he's at Tennessee, where the Vols are hoping he can stabilize their situation. And I think now there are people that think that they're ready to, take on the likes of Georgia. Well, I'm here to tell you, if they can beat Georgia, they can beat anybody in the country. But, last week, when Gus Malzahn said Georgia was probably the most talented team in the SEC, Kirby Smart snapped back and said that Auburn was the most talented team in the SEC. It's pretty clear that Auburn is not the most talented team in the SEC after getting whipped pretty good last week by Georgia. But Tennessee, to me, in watching the film, is in the same ballpark as Auburn. It depends on the position that you're talking about. Everybody's making a lot about Tennessee's offensive line, but they're not perfect at all. The quarterback play at Tennessee has been what I would call spotty. And they do not have the skilled players that they did a season ago, and certainly a few seasons ago at wide receiver. That's really where Tennessee's fallen off, is at wide receiver to me. Running backs are fine. They're not, this isn't high low. It's not got Sony and Nick running at you. So I think, to me, that what Jeremy's saying is about right. I'm not sure I would say this is one of the best teams in the last few years yet. Now, if Stetson Bennett continues to play pretty well, then this team is definitely dangerous. But there's a lot of teams in Georgia's way. I mean, we'll start with Tennessee. They still have to deal with the Gators. Obviously, next week they've got to play Alabama. You still have on the horizon Clemson and Ohio State. Georgia has to prove they're better than all 5 of those teams before we start comparing them to one of the best teams in the last few years. The defense may be one of the best ones in the last few years. That's where I think Tennessee's going to have the hardest time coming in this game. When you think about the situation that the Vols are in, the quarterback, Garantano, not accurate all the time. Secondly, although he has his hands, both hands on the ball, the vast majority of the time when he starts to take off running, which is something I watch for a lot, he's not a dynamic runner. He's a solid runner. He is not Bo Nix. He does not have the escapability of Bo Nix, who looked like Deshaun Watson back there, performing magic tricks, getting out of with spin moves and so forth. Nobody that Georgia faces from here on out, maybe with the exception of Trevor, maybe with the exception of Justin, have Bo Nix's escapability. I think, structurally, we're going to see both Auburn and Tennessee are going to take some losses this year from here on out. But structurally, Tennessee, the offensive line is better than Auburn. I don't know if everything else is better. I mean, they got pushed around by South Carolina, the defensive line. You certainly can throw on Tennessee. I've seen that. Last week against Missouri, they were dealing with a backup quarterback. That's who came in and played the bulk of that game. He threw better than the starter, but Tennessee was, that was their situation a week ago. They kind of routine Missouri. I wouldn't say that they really had to struggle to win that game. They didn't look great when they won it. It was fine. So they've got a real tall task. I mean, in talking with people around the league that I do, there's plenty of, there's people the people that I trust who have actually seen Tennessee play live say that people are going to make a big deal about this Tennessee-Georgia game, and that there's going to be all this hype about it, and that Georgia's going to come in and roll them. A week ago, I thought that Auburn really was going to struggle against Georgia on the just on the lines. Tennessee will have the same problem. It just won't be as obvious, I don't think, at the beginning of the game. The problem for Tennessee is they don't have the skill players that Auburn has, to me. So that it's not a great combination. So we'll see. I mean, Tennessee hasn't turned the ball over yet. I'm not sure how. Coming from some of the things that I watched, the kicking game, one of the field goals I saw from Tennessee. I mean, you just don't want to see the ball fly like that off of a place kicker's leg. But Tennessee has shown in the past, particularly with Phil Fulmer, that they can come to Athens and surprise. I mean, 2004 was definitely a big time upset, one of the biggest upsets in the series history, even though both teams were ranked. 2016, that was not an upset that I recall, but it was a miracle for Tennessee to be in position to win that game. It was a miracle that Georgia was in position to win it. I mean, Georgia dominated that game the entire time until about halfway through the fourth quarter. Well, I think if you're Georgia, you don't want to get in a situation where this is a fourth quarter game. The other thing, so twice in recent memory, if you want to call it that, Tennessee has come to Athens and come from behind to win. 2006, Georgia gets up by a substantial margin, but then loses that game when Tennessee just came roaring back. I mean, it was crazy. And then, of course, 2016 with Tennessee, was the better team for sure and didn't play well. And then all of a sudden got some big plays with turnovers and so forth. Looked like Georgia was going to save themselves and didn't at the end of the day. So if you're talking about those sorts of games, of course Tennessee's going to have a shot. I think the problem is, there are a couple of issues here still. We still don't totally know a lot about Stetson Bennett. He's not as wild with the ball as the Tennessee quarterback has been, or Felipe Franks, or just like some of these other quarterbacks. But quarterbacks can have bad days. And that's why you don't want them throwing 60 balls, or 40 or 30 even, if you can help it. So you don't totally know what the deal is with Stetson completely in those scenarios. I mean, again, quarterbacks are going to have bad days. The other thing is, what if there are just mistakes that are made by special teams? Kyrus Jackson has a fumble or two. Doesn't feel like that's going to happen. What happens if there's a pick six? What about, a busted coverage? I mean, the one thing I would be worried about, if you want to call it that, if you're Tennessee, is Kirby said tonight to reporters that Georgia did not play well defensively a season ago in Knoxville. They allowed 14 points. So I don't know if he's got... I mean, there's no question there's some bad blood between Tennessee and Georgia. I mean, I don't... The way Jeremy Pruitt left Athens was not in a genteel way. I mean, it wasn't when he left. It was the run-up to the leaving. And that was not good. But in that time since then, they've had a different head coach take over at Georgia. And there's a lot of intermingling. I mean, a guy that Kirby fired is on Tennessee's staff. A former offensive line coach, Will Friend, who I like a lot, is on Tennessee's staff. You've got still the dynamic of Jeremy coming back to Athens, this time not in front of a lot of people. I think some people really liked Jeremy that were sort of hard-ass people. Most of the Georgia folks did not. But trumping all that is this Cade Mays stuff, the notion that Georgia has a toxic atmosphere. I mean, that's probably something you just shouldn't throw around. And Kirby's been dismissing it publicly, but I know that plus the way that they feel like they played a season ago in Tennessee, those are major things. And this game is an away game for the Vols. They've already played an away game, but playing in Athens is not going to be an easy thing for them. Okay, it's not some sort of simple thing. This century they've won in Athens 3 times. That's actually not that bad. For generally speaking, Tennessee has not done well this century against Georgia. But, last decade, 2016 is the only time they won in Athens. They only won twice. Again, they won in 2015 and come back win, and 2016 and come back win. So there's one was in Knoxville and one was in Athens. There have been some blowouts. The last 3 games have been blowouts. 2012 was a tighter game than people thought. But when Tennessee's played well, they've had Jim Chaney as their offensive coordinator for the most part. Last year that didn't really happen. But I think you're going to see a lot of things bubbling up under the surface. The question is, can Tennessee put it together for longer than 2.5 quarters? That's going to be challenging for Tennessee. It's going to be challenging for a lot of teams not named Alabama and Florida. So that's Georgia's pretty good. Can Tennessee win? Sure, but they've got a long road ahead of them. Dean Legge from Dog Post, making you a smarter Georgia fan. Make sure you click to subscribe to our Insider newsletter, and we'll see you over on the website.